Hey Monsters, thanks so much for joining us for another podcast episode / weekly cult meeting.
Have you ever noticed how perfect cults always sound before the big twist in the documentary? Us too. That's what inspired us to start a cult where the only spooky twists are our Wednesday Addams braids. If you've ever wanted to get away from the world with some baby animals and some fellow weirdos and tell murder stories around a crackling campfire, the Monster Commune is for you. To become an official member today, just head over to patreon.com/MurderMurder.news so we can get you your own flashy title like Grandmaster of Goats, a shout out on the show, and exclusive access to our regular patron-only content.
It's about that time again. We'll soon be posting September's special video episode to Patreon, so patrons, keep your eyes peeled. In case you're just finding us for the very first time today, allow us to introduce ourselves. I'm Angelina, and I'm hanging out with my sinister sister, Aurora. How's your week going?
Well, it's great. And speaking of adorable baby animals at a cult, I spent the weekend on a goat farm. Yes.
Yeah. That's
very
so
cute.
Amazing. And there was no shortage of baby goats by the looks of things. So many cute little dudes.
Yeah, they had some baby goats. Allegedly, there was a baby rabbit on the farm, but we never found the baby rabbit. I'm so disappointed.
Well, they're probably so small.
Yeah, but they're in like crates, like in the barn, like probably too small of a space for a rabbit as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But we didn't find them, but we did find the baby goats, and it was so cute. I got to feed them carrots and apples and was living my best cult life.
Oh, that's so amazing.
Yes.
And you visited a haunted house?
Yeah, so this was cool. We were just walking around Bennington, Vermont, which is where my husband went to college. And while exploring the town, we stopped at this cute little old cemetery where Robert Frost was buried, and some old churches, and all these things were built in the 1700s and are super adorable. And we walked past this kind of condemned old building that used to be an inn, and was also built in the 1750s, I think. And so we were trying to think if we could try to sneak in there, but there's all these do not trespass signs and whatever.
Oh.
And we went to this really cute hotel next door that had to have a little cocktail while we were in the area. And the owner there said that they have it so secured that if you kids all the time try to hop the fence, he's the police will be here in 5 minutes. Don't do it. Absolutely do not go in there.
Gosh.
So I'm glad we didn't try to break in.
Yeah, I guess.
That would have been a bad idea. But we got cute pictures in front of it. And then at that hotel, they had a little pamphlet with a story behind the inn next door. And it had actually been lived in until somewhat recently, and was still in use as an inn until the 90s when my husband would have been there for school. And it looked still pretty dilapidated in the photos I saw then. So, so we're going to buy it, and we're going to turn it into the home of our cult.
Yeah.
Keep it as is. We're not doing any renovations.
Monster Commune. No, You're going to have creaky floors and cobwebs and
so
a
many
ghost
cobwebs
in each bedroom.
Everyone gets their own baby ghost.
Oh, yeah. I want baby ghosts. That's the best.
I love it.
Oh, that's great. My week was less eventful. I've been, working on making some merch for this festival.
Yes.
I turned on the heat. That's cool. It's, one more sort of landmark, one milestone of spooky season.
Yes.
So I don't know.
The heat
I guess
comes
that's
on.
good.
Wow, that's so incredible because, we were about 4 hours from Montreal over the weekend. We actually flew into the Montreal airport and drove down to Vermont and got a car from there. And coming back up to Montreal for our flight home, I could not believe how fast the temperature dropped in that amount of time.
Yeah.
For those of you who aren't quite familiar with how borders and stuff sit up there, Vermont borders Quebec. So it's actually not that far to go from Quebec down to Vermont. And But like it dropped 20 degrees on our drive. It was like quite summery and nice when we left Bennington in the morning. And by the time we got up to Montreal, it was quite cold and raining and we didn't have coats or anything. So
yeah. And I think it's been about 10 degrees Celsius, which is pretty cold. But it's so strange even for us in Montreal because we've all been sort of noting that, like, remember 2 weeks ago when we were like, it's so hot. It was just like that. It just like there's not really much of an in-between. It's just a sudden plummet. So whatever.
I love that time of the year that I go from complaining that I'm too hot to complaining I'm too cold.
Oh, yeah. New complaints. It's fresh. It's new.
I love
it's exciting.
anything to complain about.
Yeah, it's the best.
The Pacific Northwest True Crime Fest is drawing near, and let this be a reminder to grab your tickets before they're gone. The festival is taking place October 8th and 9th in the Green River Event and Conference Center in the Seattle suburb of Auburn, Washington. We'll be performing a special live in-person episode on Sunday the 9th, and we'll be at the MMN table all weekend, so you can drop by and say hi and grab yourself a bit of murder merch. We've got a whole new line of spooky merch that you will definitely want to get your hands on. You can find a link in today's episode notes or our special social media pages to where you can get your tickets. Use code MM15 for 15% off a weekend pass or single day ticket.
Let's kick off today's episode with a look at some of the true crime stories that made headlines this week.
If you're in the true crime community, you probably already heard the big news that Adnan Syed has been released from prison on Monday after his conviction was overturned. For those of you who haven't followed his case, Adnan was charged with the 1999 murder of Hae Min Lee, an 18-year-old high school student in Baltimore, Maryland. Hae disappeared in January of 1999, only to be found strangled to death in a park almost a month later. Adnan, her ex-boyfriend, was charged with her murder, but the popular podcast Serial brought into question whether or not Adnan had received a fair trial. A judge ruled that the state violated its legal obligation to share evidence that could have bolstered Adnan's defense. After serving 23 years for Hae's murder, Adnan has since been released from custody and placed on house arrest with GPS monitoring. The judge ordered the state to decide whether to seek a new trial date or dismiss the case within 30 days. Hae's brother, Young, still believes Adnan is guilty of his sister's murder and does not believe the conviction should have been overturned. According to Young, quote, "This is not a podcast for me. This is real life, a never-ending nightmare for 20 plus years," end quote.
Skeletal remains located at an NYC construction site in 2020 have finally been identified as belonging to 19-year-old Stevie Bates. Stevie was reported missing in April of 2012. She had been partaking in the Occupy Wall Street protests and disappeared while traveling by Greyhound bus to New York from Hot Springs, Arkansas. Stevie was last in contact with her mother, Vivian, on April 27, 2012, when she called her from a bus stop in Pittsburgh. Stevie was on her way to her boyfriend's apartment in Queens, and she was seen on surveillance video exiting a Greyhound station on 8th Avenue and 42nd Street on April 28th. Her ex-boyfriend has said the two never met up. Her remains were uncovered, wrapped in a blanket, on September 18, 2020, during an excavation at a construction site in Queens. If you have any information about Stevie's disappearance, please call the NYPD's Crime Stoppers hotline at 1-800-577-TIPS or 8477. We'll be right back after a quick commercial break from one of our fellow Darkcast podcasts.
Are you a fan of true crime, cults, conspiracies, and all things sinister? Then tune in with me, your host Steph, every week for a new episode of the Sinister Story Hour. You can find the Sinister Story Hour on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
And we're back. Before we dig in, we want to offer a quick disclaimer. Though we joke about forming a true crime cult, that is not to diminish the severity of actual cult activity, and we want you to know that we take the cases we're discussing very seriously.
We want to deliver each story with the utmost respect to victims and anyone involved. If you feel we've missed the mark, you don't like our tone, Or if you notice we've gotten any details wrong, let us know with a quick email to MurderMurder.news@gmail.com and we'll make it right.
And we have a specific trigger warning that this episode includes graphic descriptions of violence. So if that is a particularly sensitive subject for you, you may want to skip this one and listen to one of our other episodes instead.
16 years ago this week, 16-year-old Cassie Jo Stoddart was murdered in Pocatello, Idaho, in what has since been referred to as the Scream Murders. Cassie had been pet sitting for her aunt and uncle in their remote home when she was discovered stabbed to death when her family returned home the following Sunday. Upon investigating, police learned that she had several visitors at the house in the country, and while she was house sitting, there had been some strange occurrences like a power outage and noises in the basement. Just 10 years after the movie Scream became an instant horror classic, the circumstances of Cassie's brutal death seem to have been disturbingly inspired by the film. A teenage girl alone in the middle of nowhere while killers lurk inside of the house in Halloween masks. Our sources for today include an episode of Your Worst Nightmare, interrogation footage from YouTube, Oxygen.com, Medium, Wikipedia, and more. For a full list of our sources, be sure to check out our show notes.
Cassie was born on December 21st, 1989, and grew up in Pocatello, Idaho, the fifth largest city in Idaho, with a population of just under 55,000. Cassie grew up with her mom, Anna, her older sister, Christy, and her younger brother, Andrew. The family was close, but Andrew has said he felt the closest to Cassie as a kid because they were so close in age. Christy was 6 years older than Cassie, and Andrew a year and a half younger. He was in the grade below her, and he looked up to her. Their grandparents helped raise them as kids, and Andrew remembered her as always being headstrong. She was a serious student and had plans to go to college to become an attorney. She always got straight A's, wasn't interested in drinking or partying, and was very down to earth. She was interested in art and music. She had a talent for drawing, and her mom still has some of her art hanging up. Cassie not only loved drawing, but she collected art prints from her favorite artists, lining the walls of her bedroom.
Andrew looked to Cassie as a role model and remembers how smart she was. Christy, her older sister, remembers that she had been a shy kid, but she really blossomed around junior high and high school. She made friends easily, and she would do anything to help anyone. She loved people and animals. She was remembered for being the type of person you could always talk to. She was motivated and driven, and once she set her mind to do something, she was going to get it. Cassie was incredibly responsible for her age, and her aunt and uncle, Frank and Allison Contreras, could count on her to take care of their kids and pets. The couple had a blended family and had just moved from the Bay Area of California to a quiet area of Pocatello, Whispering Cliffs, where they enjoyed having a more peaceful way of life with a house on 2 acres. Their closest neighbor was half a mile away. They lived in their dream home with their 3 kids, 2 dogs, and 3 cats. They trusted their niece Cassie with their pets, kids, and home. Frank had a job in Nevada, and Allison and the kids would travel back and forth to visit him while he was working.
They had asked Cassie to house sit for them on the weekend of September 22nd. Cassie not only loved animals, but she was also saving up to buy a car. For her, house sitting for her aunt and uncle was also a way to demonstrate how responsible she was while making a little extra cash for her car fund. While the house at 11372 West Whispering Cliffs was quiet and remote with no neighbors in view, it was only about 15 minutes away from her mom's house. That Friday, September 22nd, started off just like any other day for Cassie. She went to school at Pocatello High School. She talked to her boyfriend of 4 or 5 months, Matt Beckham. Matt was planning on joining her at her aunt and uncle's house that night. According to Matt, Cassie was also friends with Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk, both 16 as well. And she had mentioned she would be house sitting that weekend. Matt said when Cassie brought it up to Brian and Tori, the 2 teens said, "Oh, so we're going to have a party." Cassie assumed they were just joking and kept saying absolutely not. She was way too responsible to host a bunch of drunk high school students at her aunt and uncle's home.
Tori and Brian fancied themselves filmmakers and were always talking about making the perfect horror movie, all while carrying around a camera. That day, Brian was walking around school making little video clips, and he spotted Cassie at her locker. She's on camera getting books out of her locker, and Brian asked if she knew why Tori had been late for school. Cassie seems a little uninterested in the conversation, and she unenthusiastically said hi for the camera when Brian asked her to. After school that day, Cassie and Matt both headed to the split-level home in Whispering Cliffs. One source says Anna, Cassie's mom, picked up Cassie and Matt from school around 3:45 p.m. and drove them to the house. Other sources have said Cassie's mom dropped her off in her white Jeep Cherokee first, and Matt joined her around 5 or 6 p.m. Either way, Cassie and Matt had been a serious couple, and Cassie's family really liked Matt. Christy described him as a gentleman and said he treated her well. The two would usually just hang out and watch movies together. Around 5 or 6, Tori called Cassie and asked if he and Brian could come over. Cassie was never one to turn away a friend and said it was fine if they stopped by.
Around 8 p.m., Tori and Brian arrived, and the two asked for a tour. They were curious about the big house and wanted to see all the rooms, even the basement. Cassie sort of showed them around, but mostly they just walked around doing things you would expect teenage boys to do in the early 2000s. Brian had insisted on trying to play with the Contreras dogs, even though they didn't like men, and Cassie had warned the dogs would bite. They looked through her aunt and uncle's movies and, considering themselves film buffs, commented on and critiqued their collection. At one point, Matt showed Brian a big knife he had found in the kitchen. They talked about it for a bit and then ended up settling down in the living room to watch Kill Bill 2, a movie they were all into. Brian said he got bored watching the movie since Cassie and Matt were making out, as teenagers do, and Brian and Tori left the house around 9:30 p.m. when it was clear there would not be a party at Cassie's aunt and uncle's house. They told Cassie and Matt they were going to see a movie at the nearby theater. Matt wanted to possibly get a ride home from Tori and Brian, so he told them he would follow up with them later and that the three might all hang out together after leaving Cassie.
Around 9:30 p.m., Anna, Cassie's mom, called to check in on her, and she told her mom she was watching movies with Matt and everything was fine. Matt tried calling his mom sometime before 10. He had to be home by midnight, so he was hoping to get a ride from her. She was at Walmart at the time and didn't answer. He called Brian and Tori around 10 p.m., and the two said they were watching a movie, Pulse, in a theater, and they had to whisper. Around that time, there were a few strange occurrences at the house in Whispering Cliffs. There were strange noises in the bathroom, and then the lights went out. Since the house was so secluded, it wasn't easy to tell if the electricity was out in nearby houses. The lights came back on a few moments later, but then went out again. Matt and Cassie investigated a bit, and Matt noticed one of the dogs was staring down the basement steps, growling into the darkness. Which, for anybody that is a pet owner, you know, when your pet is like staring at something in the dark and reacting, it's like the most terrifying thing imaginable.
Absolutely. It seems ghostly, which, I mean, I guess it wasn't, but either way, horrifying.
Yes.
Cassie and Matt were freaked out. Matt finally got a hold of his mom, Sherry, just before 11. He told her about the lights being out and that Cassie was reasonably afraid to be in the house alone. He asked if he could stay the night with Cassie to make her feel safe. Sherry was very uncomfortable with the idea of letting two high schoolers stay alone in a house together and told him absolutely not. She felt bad leaving Cassie in a home without electricity, so she offered to come pick up both of them to stay at their house. Cassie, always reliable, did not want to abandon her responsibilities and leave her family's pets alone. Sherry heard Cassie in the background saying she had to go let the dogs out in the morning, so she wouldn't be able to leave. After talking to his mom, Matt called Brian and Tori and told them that he didn't need a ride. The exact timeline of what happened next is a little fuzzy. Many sources report the times of the phone calls between Matt and his mom and Matt and Brian to be a little different. Many report the time Sherry and Matt's dad arrived in Whispering Cliffs as being a bit earlier. But according to Sherry and Matt, during his subsequent interrogation with police, Sherry got to the house sometime around 11:20, 11:30 p.m. She said she had a receipt from Walmart with a 10:30 timestamp, which is the time many have reported she picked up Matt. The receipt seems to imply that the earliest she could have gotten home and then driven the 15 minutes to Whispering Cliffs would have been 11 at the very earliest.
When Sherry got there, she picked up Matt and did not see Cassie. The lights in the house were all off. Matt says he tried to convince Cassie to go with him one last time, but she would not leave her aunt and uncle's pets alone overnight and decided to stay at the house even though she was frightened. Matt told her he loved her and left. He went home with his parents, and according to Sherry, she went to bed around midnight. Matt stayed up and watched 2 movies with his dad. His dad fell asleep on the couch, and Matt eventually went to bed. He tried calling Cassie at 12:15 a.m. to make sure she was okay. There was no answer. Matt called Cassie in the morning again and again. Cassie didn't answer. Her mom, Anna, tried calling, and still no answer. On Saturday, Tori spent the night at Brian's house. According to Brian, they were going to go check on Cassie, but Tori didn't have enough gas to get there, and Brian was broke.
On Sunday afternoon, the Contreras got home around 1:15 p.m. Their 13-year-old daughter, Kelsey, was the first in the house. She noticed the front door was open and there was broken glass on the ground. And then she saw the lifeless body of Cassie lying face up on the living room floor. Cassie was found in yellow pajama bottoms and a white spaghetti strap shirt. She'd been stabbed 30 times in the neck, chest, abdomen, groin, and leg. She had a 1-inch contusion over her eye. 12 of those wounds were fatal. Cassie had fought hard for her life with defensive wounds on her hands and arms. There were 2 different knives used in Cassie's attack. There was no sign of sexual assault. Her aunt, Allison, called 911 frantic, saying Cassie was dead. When asked if she could perform CPR, she said she was cold and her fingers were blue. Just as Allison called for help, Anna, Cassie's mother, pulled up to the house to pick up Cassie. Cassie's sister, Christy, found out when her uncle came to her work, telling her Cassie had been stabbed and hadn't made it. Andrew, her brother, found out while staying at a friend's house. He couldn't get a hold of his mom and had to wait for a ride from his friend to be with his family.
Investigators had a few suspects on their radar right away. First, they found fingerprints from Anna's boyfriend in the basement and initially believed he could have been connected. He had recently done some work at the house and was able to explain why his fingerprints had been around. They questioned Matt right away. He was Cassie's boyfriend and the last one known to see her alive. Her murder felt personal and aggressive. Police believed it had been a crime of passion. Aside from that, Matt was reacting very strangely to the whole situation. He seemed to be showing no emotion about his girlfriend being savagely killed. Had it been possible, Matt had killed Cassie before his mom picked him up. Sherry had not seen Cassie when she picked Matt up the previous Friday. Had she already been dead? Was it possible Matt had snuck out of the house after his parents were both asleep? He did technically have a car, which he shared with his dad.
Investigators asked Matt to submit to a polygraph test, which he was very anxious about taking. He had a lot of questions about his fear and anxiety, making him look guilty. He asked what would happen if his heart was beating fast, and while discussing whether or not he would submit to the test, he ended up revealing that he had shown Brian the big knife in the kitchen we mentioned earlier. With that information being revealed, Matt's mom shut down the interview and said she needed to talk to her son about this new detail in the story he hadn't revealed before. Police interviewed Tori and Brian separately. The two had similar stories about going to Cassie's aunt's house that night to watch a movie. The two said they had left Cassie and Matt around 9:30 p.m. to see a movie. They had intended to see Click with Adam Sandler, but when they arrived at the theater just before 10, they realized they had just missed the start time of 9:45. Instead, they decided to see Pulse, a 2006 horror movie starring Kristen Bell and Ian Somerhalder. They mentioned the calls from Matt during the movie.
It seemed like a solid alibi, but neither of the two boys could tell detectives anything about the movie. When investigators pushed them further, Brian said they had sat through 2 hours of the film, but couldn't describe one single scene. He couldn't describe who had sold them the tickets, but said it was some guy. He said he had spent part of the movie flirting with a girl named Heather, who maybe did or maybe didn't go to a school nearby. They couldn't guess how many people were in the theater with them or exactly where they sat. There was only one person selling tickets at the theater that night, and that person happened to be a female student who went to school with Brian and Tori. She knew them both and was certain they had not bought tickets to see any movie that Friday.
While questioning Brian, investigators mentioned the inconsistencies in his story and told him they knew he wasn't at the theater on the night of September 22nd. Brian's version shifted. According to him, he had not gone to see a movie with Tori. The two had actually gone on a mission to rob cars. They had broken into 4 or 5 cars trying to find pocket change and CDs. The next time they brought in Tori, his story matched Brian's, and they both said they had spent their evening breaking into cars. Yet again, when pressed for details, they couldn't even describe colors, makes, or models of cars they had broken into. They couldn't be specific about any items they had managed to steal. At one point, Tori said he had acquired a sleeve of CDs, but the jig was up when his mom said she had seen that sleeve of CDs around the house before the night of Cassie's murder. She'd even questioned Tori about them prior to that evening. At one point, Brian mentioned having a long-time crush on Cassie. In Matt's interview, he mentioned both Brian and Tori had previously been into Cassie.
When police brought in Brian a third time, investigators convinced him that they believed Tori had been the real killer and that it would benefit him to come clean to save himself. Brian confessed to the murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart, stating it really had been Tori's idea all along. According to Brian, the two had gone over to visit Cassie that night with the intent to scare her. While at her house, Brian had snuck off to unlock the garage door to the house so the two could sneak off and come back in later. After leaving the house under the guise of seeing a movie, they instead moved their car a little ways down the street. They had a kill kit stashed in the car with 2 sets of gloves, 2 long-sleeve black shirts, 4 knives, 2 creepy plastic masks, and a pair of work boots. They got changed into all black and headed back into the house through the unlocked garage door with their masks and knives around 10 p.m.
The two hid in the basement with a plan of luring Cassie and Matt downstairs. They first tried making creepy noises so they would come investigate. They threw glass ashtrays on the ground. When that didn't work, they accessed the fuse box to cut power for parts of the house. That still didn't work, and they continued to lurk in the basement. When Matt called Brian and Tori about getting a ride, they had told him they were in the theater and had to whisper. In reality, they were in the basement, trying to talk as quietly as possible as to not give away that they were in fact inside the house. When it became clear that they would not be able to lure Cassie and Matt to the basement, they came up with a new plan. They would wait until Matt left and then head upstairs to attack Cassie. And that's what they did. Sometime after 11, Matt left to go home with his mom. Cassie, still freaked out by weird instances around the house, was lying on the couch alone in the dark.
Brian and Tori came up the stairs. Brian slammed a closet door in a final attempt to scare her. Then they ambushed her. They wanted her scared. According to Brian, the next thing he knew, Tori's knife was in the air, then stabbing Cassie repeatedly. He hadn't wanted it to go that far. He said Tori threatened him and told him to make sure she was dead. Brian believed she was already dead and stabbed her in the leg. Brian told police he had disposed of the evidence used in Cassie's murder in Black Rock Canyon recreational site, about 16 miles from Cassie's aunt's house. They had taken a shovel from Brian's house and hid matches, a melted hydrogen peroxide bottle, work boots, several pairs of gloves, and a few knives. Investigators also discovered videotapes Brian and Tori had made leading up to the murder, as well as immediately after they stabbed her to death. These tapes told a very different story than what Brian had confessed to the police.
Brian and Tori had been best friends, with it being a bit unclear who may have been the ringleader. Brian had been seemingly popular and had always fit in and been well-liked. He played soccer and was outgoing. He played the drums in a band. But he also had an interest in Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris, who terrorized their fellow students at the Columbine shooting in 1999. In fact, in 2004, it was reported to school officials that Brian had been planning a school shooting and had been recorded talking about his plans with other students who then turned him in. He was brought in to talk to the school principal and was given a warning. A month later, he talked to another student about a school shooting he was planning at a dance, but the school still believed he was not a threat. Tori was more quiet than Brian and wanted to be a filmmaker. He considered himself a film buff and was very into horror movies, especially Halloween and Scream.
These tapes revealed that the boys had long since been planning not only Cassie's murder, but a whole string of murders of their fellow students. Tori at one point mentions his goal is to kill 20 people, and Brian says he hopes to have a 2-week streak of murders before getting caught. Tori argued with him, believing they could get away with it for longer. Both boys grew up in the Mormon church and at some point became atheists. We're going to play a few snippets from the recordings, so we want to give an extra warning as their conversations are incredibly disturbing. In the tapes, the boys flippantly joke about their kill list and idolizing serial killers like Ted Bundy and Ed Kemper.
They were sick psychopaths who had the pleasure of killing other people.
That sounds good, baby.
We're gonna go down in history. We're gonna be just like Scream, except real life terms.
We're
gonna be murderers.
Good, baby.
Like, let's see, Ted Bundy, like the Hillside Strangler, the Zodiac Killer.
Those people are more amateurs compared to what we're gonna be. We're gonna be more of higher sources of
Gene. Well, except for that sick and that twisted.
Oh, do you know what Gene's words were?
What?
Saw a girl walking down the street, right?
Yeah.
2 questions came to his head. I could take her out, have a nice time with her.
The killer.
And show her a
Get
good
her
time.
alive?
Charm the pants off her. Or, I wonder what her head would look like on a stick.
Holy shit.
That's creepy,
Yeah.
huh?
Holy shit.
Tori struggled to identify the source of the quote he referenced, but he's paraphrasing Ed Kemper. Together, the two had plans to become prolific serial killers and had gone to several students' houses with the hopes of finding them home alone, making them their first victim. Each time, their plans were interrupted.
My friend's too pussy to go investigate. Turn here.
Too smart.
Why are you turning there, dude?
Specialist.
Okay. Now we're gonna go over to Cassie and Matt's house. If they're home alone, we're gonna see.
Cassie's house, Matt, is there.
That is there. Sorry. We're gonna knock on the door. We'll see who's there. We'll see if their parents are home or not. If they're home alone, we will leave our way, and then we will come back in about 10 minutes. We'll sneak in through the door because chances are they're probably in Cassie's room. So we'll sneak in the front door. We'll make a noise outside, and Matt will come out, investigate, kill him, and it'll scare the shit out of Cassie. Okay? Well,
Sounds like fun.
we'll stay tuned.
The night before Cassie's murder, the two apparently met up with Cassie and Matt, and something must have gone wrong because Tori and Brian left. We can assume that during their visit, Cassie must have mentioned staying at her aunt's house because the two recorded this video about 20 minutes later.
We found our victim, and sad as it may be, she's our friend. But you know what? We all have to make sacrifices. Our first victim is going to be Cassie Stoddart and her
God,
friends.
turn your brights off,
Well,
asshole.
yeah, we'll find out if she has friends over. She's going to be alone in a big, dark house out in the middle of nowhere. How perfect can you get? I mean, like, holy shit, dude.
I'm horny just thinking about it.
Hell yeah. So we're gonna fucking kill her and her friends, and we're gonna keep moving on. I heard some news about Kirsten. She's gonna be home alone from 6 to 7. So we might kill her, then drive over to Cassie's thing, and scare the shit out of them, then kill them one by fucking one. Hell yeah.
The next day at school, Brian and Tori skipped class to work on their plan to murder Cassie and Matt. They recorded a video while working on a written plan.
Hopefully you don't have to go through 8 or 9 failures like we have.
Yeah, we probably tried it 10 times, but they've never been home alone, so
more than they have. Their parents show up.
As long as we're patient, and we were patient, never getting paid off because I made things home alone. So we got our plan all worked out now. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Cassie's family, but she had to be one. We have to stick with the plan. And she's perfect, so she's gonna die.
Brian and Tori went to Cassie's aunt's house with the intent of staying for a while, then leaving, creating some sort of commotion Matt would investigate, then killing him and Cassie next. They asked for a tour of the home from Cassie so they could look for places to hide in order to create a distraction that would separate Matt from Cassie, making them easier to pick off like a horror movie. The basement seemed like the perfect place to hide and ambush Matt. When they were at the house around 8 p.m., Brian had left the door to the garage unlocked so he could sneak in later. The two then went to Tori's car to get the kill kit.
It was 9:50, September 22nd, 2006. We know there's lots of doors. There's lots of places to hide. I locked the back doors. That's all locked. Now we just gotta wait.
When they were unable to separate the two by creating weird noises and power outages, they waited for Matt to leave so it would be easier to just kill Cassie alone. Unlike the confession from Brian where he claimed the attack had been a prank and Tori took it too far, the next video Brian made was immediately after they stabbed Cassie to death.
I just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a fucking joke.
I'm shaking.
I stabbed her in the throat and I saw her lifeless body just disappear. Dude, I just killed Cassie. Oh, fuck. That felt like fucking real. I mean, it went by so fast.
Shut the fuck up. We gotta get our act straight.
Okay.
And as a side note, in case it's a little hard to tell who's talking there, that was Brian doing most of the talking, saying he had stabbed her in the throat. So unlike his confession saying that Tori had sort of been pushing him along and he had only stabbed her in the leg, that's clearly not true, which I'm sure that detectives, investigators would have been able to tell from the knives that they used. Of course, like different knives would have made different stab wounds. But he clearly was very vocal and very excited to have been involved in this, unfortunately.
Brian and Tori were arrested on September 27, 2006, on charges of first-degree murder as well as conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. They were both found guilty of the charges and both received life sentences in prison without the possibility for parole, plus 30 years to life for the conspiracy to commit murder. Both are still serving their sentences at the Idaho State Correctional Institution. In 2010, both separately filed an appeal, and both appeals were denied. The same year, the Stoddard family filed a civil lawsuit against the Idaho School District, claiming that the school authorities were negligent and should have known that Brian and Tori posed a threat to others based on their plans for a school shooting reported to the principal. Both the civil court and the Idaho Supreme Court dismissed the case, saying the actions of the killers were not foreseeable.
Tori attempted 2 unsuccessful appeals in 2015 and 2019 and is currently attempting a 4th. Frank Contreras has spoken of the impact of the appeals by his niece's killers. Quote, "It's like Groundhog's Day. The same thing over and over," Frank said. "I just quit loving and started drinking. It put pressure on my marriage and my family." End quote. Her brother, Andrew, had a similar perspective. When asked if he could ever forgive Brian and Tori, he responded, quote, "No. After everything I've seen and how long they've dragged this out, no. I've sat through everything. I've sat through every hour of trials. No. There's not a doubt in my mind that they both did it. I've sat down and talked with my family about it, and really what it does is reopen the wound. Every other month we go back in and sit in the courtroom. It's like a recurring nightmare." End quote.
Wow. That is extremely disturbing.
Yeah, it's really disturbing. And, like we hear about so many murders, whether they're from serial killers or crimes of passion or whatever. And to hear this one, like so planned, and to hear how excited they were, like to hear their voices and them making jokes about it, and just how like little they valued somebody's life. It's so upsetting.
Yeah. And I'm not sure that I've ever heard like sort of audio evidence of that transition between like desiring to become a serial killer and then having just committed their first murder.
Right.
Like hearing their reactions to both of those ideas in both of those situations.
Right.
Like, I think that's such a rare insight. It's so weird that they documented this on video, but because they did, we really got an interesting window to that, which, is disturbing, but wow, impactful.
Yeah, you're right. And even going into the murder, like the video they had made just prior, and Tori had mentioned how turned on, how aroused he is by the thought of doing this. And, it's something that we hear in the instances of serial killers. That's absolutely a thing. Like it's, partially arousal and such, but it's so upsetting hearing it. Ugh,
yeah.
Gross.
It is. And I personally do think that the school was negligent as well.
Absolutely.
Like, I know they dropped that, but like they heard reports, I guess we said on more than one occasion that they were thinking about doing a school
More than one
shooting.
occasion.
Yeah. So you would think that at the very least he'd be expelled.
Absolutely. And I think that there should have been more repercussions for him planning this and talking about this. And this was just 7 years after Columbine. So like the proximity, like this should have felt very real. And of course, this was in a time that school shootings felt much
more rare,
newer.
Yeah.
Now they've become so much more frequent. But like it should have felt like worse. Like unfortunately, I think you kind of get like calloused to it. And now like we just hear of so many. It's hard to like find a place like in your heart to be equally as upset by each one because they happen so commonly, which is awful. But especially Columbine, I think impacted people so deeply. And I don't know. They should have done more. And I think part of the reason why the civil case didn't go anywhere is because Brian had planned it with another student who his initials were named in the lawsuit, not that student, but it wasn't planned with Tori. And I think that there was an argument to be made in court that Tori was the ringleader and Brian was going along with this killing. So to say that.
But seeing these videos, not possible. Not possible.
I so agree. I so agree. But I think that I don't know what was shown in that case. Like, I'm not sure what was admissible for the civil case. So I'm not sure if these videos were shown, but I know that Brian did play a very good victim when he had been interrogated. And like, you kind of believe him. Watching the videos, he's a very convincing liar.
Well, that's because he's obviously a psychopath as well.
Yeah,
so that's,
exactly. Like they were both very calm in their interrogations.
Yeah, I think that should be a symbol as well for that he was a bigger part of the, like more of the ringleader, the fact that he was planning a school shooting with another kid and then now carried out a murder with a different kid. Good point. The common denominator would be Brian. So
yeah, that's a good point. And there's so much of this video footage that you can find online. And we have shared a link to like an hour-long one, plus the interrogations and such. You can see a lot of videos of them interacting separately and together. And I just tried to use the snippets that were relevant, but they both kind of like push each other's buttons. And initially when I had listened to other podcasts and such about this story, they had sort of implicated Tori because he was sort of like the darker, spookier one. And he was into horror movies and such. But like listening to it, I feel like they're both quite equally responsible. If not, I think Brian was more manipulative of the two. And just because he played soccer and people liked him more doesn't mean he's not a sociopath or psychopath. I don't know anything about this.
No, it's actually even weirder because like he doesn't have the excuse of being like, oh, well, I could have been good, but I was bullied.
Right.
It's not like that. So what is the deal?
Right. And another interesting thing that I would love to hear more about from somebody who might know about this, aka Fanny, our number one Fanny, if Fanny is not so busy with her baby right now sitting around. The interrogators, or somebody that had broken down the interrogations, had mentioned that Brian has a stutter. And the person breaking this down is a psychologist, or like at least like claims to have some credentials around psychology, and they were using very technical language. So I believe that's probably true. And they said that that's often believed to have come from like childhood trauma and such. And he pointed out that one really interesting facet of this is in the interrogations, you can notice Brian stutter, especially when he's nervous. But in a lot of these recordings he made with Tori, when you would think he's not nervous, they're just kind of planning and like talking together and they're giggling, you can hear it as well. The one time he doesn't have it is immediately after the murder.
Ugh.
Yeah.
So that was not like fear in his voice. It was like exhilaration.
Right.
Yeah.
Just exhilaration, and like the stutter was gone. And every other video that they had recorded, you could notice his stutter. It's pretty apparent.
Yeah. Ugh, yikes.
Yeah.
So what are you watching this week?
I don't think I've really watched anything true crimey. Like I had a bunch of flights over the weekend and I watched like the new Top Gun movie, which I liked. I was shocked. I don't think I've seen the original.
That is surprising.
Yeah.
I read something about how it's actually like war propaganda or something. And I was like, oh. It's like funded heavily by the makers of these like war jets, I guess. It's basically a big advertisement for that.
I'm
apparently.
sure that's so true. And like I am certainly not like pro
war, yeah.
war at all.
No.
So but I thought it was very like heartfelt, some of the relationships and such. And this was while I was drinking a free sparkling wine on the plane because the flight attendants told me my hair was cute and pink and gave me one because they couldn't take my debit card. So they're like, just take it. Your hair is so pretty. So this was like a champagne in while I'm watching it. But I did not expect to like it. And it was like the only thing on the plane that I hadn't seen. Like I watched Hacks on the plane, which of course is great. And I was like, okay, everybody loves it so much. I'm going to give it a shot. And I'm probably going to turn off after 10 minutes. But I found myself like enjoying it, which I was surprised. And certainly not like the military aspect, because they don't talk about what the mission is. It's just, cool stunts. And like being married to somebody in film, and like some of our best friends are in like stunt departments and stuff. It's just like amazing to see how some of that came together. Like it was a really stunning movie, and that's usually not my thing, but I felt like there were some cute, heartfelt elements.
Aw, well,
like, I don't usually like movies about men.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel you.
But I think that's all I watched. Trying to think. No, nothing. Oh, I started another show last night, a movie called Do Revenge. It's on Netflix. Have you seen this?
Haven't heard of it.
It's kind of like Heathers meets Gossip Girl meets Two Strangers on a Train.
Ooh.
And it's not like a murder plot, but like there's some like true crimey elements with like like what's it called when somebody basically like digital rape, when somebody shares your non-consensual photos.
Oh, revenge porn.
Yeah, there's like some revenge porn kinds of like elements to it, like which is why the main character wants revenge. Like there's some true crime-esque elements, but nothing like straight up murdery. But it's kind of like poppy and silly. And I have not finished it. I put it on last night before bed. I'm about halfway through, but I was really enjoying that last night. How about you?
Well, I watched The Anthrax Attacks in the Shadow of 9/11, which is a movie on Netflix. And I just kind of started it in the background of doing something. And it kind of pulled me in because I realized I had no idea what anthrax was. And so now that I do know, I'm mystified. So it's basically, it's like a mushroom / mold. It has spores. And the problem is the spores instantly jump into your lungs and like do some weird shit to you. And it's like, I didn't realize that. I kind of thought it was like a drug or like a poison.
I thought
but
so
it's not
too.
that at all.
I thought it was some like lab manufactured thing. I certainly didn't think it was something from nature.
No, it's naturally occurring. And that's the thing. People can get anthrax, like poisoning or whatever you call it, in nature as well. Like in the woods.
Oh, great.
Like,
something else
but I guess it's rare
to be paranoid about.
Yeah, but I guess it's rare. It's just like that came up because when people were getting these anthrax attacks and certain people were exposed to anthrax, like people even in the post office from handling it and whatever were exposed. And there was some debate over like, did this happen naturally to some of these people? And it's like coincidental or what? But yeah, no, it was just a big old thing, which, I just remembered very little of. I remembered a lot of talk about it at the time, but it's true that it was in the shadow of 9/11. So there was a lot of other things to talk about on the news at the time. Right. So we just got little bits and pieces. So that was fascinating. I also watched Spaceship Earth, which I didn't even put on. Louis put it on and I was doing something and I kept overhearing. And that one sucked me in too. This is about the people who did the experiment of the Biosphere 2, where they created this like biodome replica of a possible colony that they could create on the moon or Mars or whatever in the future, and just trying to see how much of a self-contained place they could create and live in. That experiment did not go very well, and some weird things happened in there. But prior to that, I didn't realize that this all started with this group of friends, weirdo friends, who I guess never had kids and just were relatively single and free and whatever. And they did all sorts of weird shit. They were traveling all over the world, and they weren't just sort of rich hippies or whatever. They were like doing random jobs in random places and building random things and creating art projects and building a hospital and like making a hotel in some random country and like trying to improve the world, but also trying to just have a great time and leave a prolific mark on the world. And they were really doing it like up until this project, which seemed to be maybe just too big to take on and obviously had to involve some other people that is hard to rely on, I guess. But like those people seemed pretty amazing and I'm in awe of them. So it's worth watching just for that. And then the last thing so I've been watching a lot of TV, I guess. I mean, I'm making these shirts and stuff, so I'm putting on lots of stuff. So I started Wayward Pines. Have you seen that? Mm-hmm. It seems like it's been on for a couple years. They got 2 seasons. And I just put it on because it was recommended to me after it's on Disney. So I was watching American Horror Stories and then the episode ended and they recommended this. So I jumped in there. And it is like Matt Dillon is the main dude. It has Juliette Lewis as well. It's like a creepy... It kind of feels like a weird Twin Peaksy thing, but it's like there's clearly some weird conspiracy going on, or this is some weird setup. It's like this guy has an accident and then finds himself in this weird town that he can't escape, and he can't understand what kind of a spell all of these people are under in this weird town. And the more it unravels, the more it's like, you were placed here. This is kind of manufactured in some way. It's weird. I'm wondering about time travel. I'm wondering about parallel universes and like how much of these things are involved. The guy is in the Secret Service, so it could be something rigged up by like the FBI or who knows. But like I'm a few episodes in and it's very good, and I didn't expect to be pulled in by that one either. So would recommend.
Nice. I'll check that out. That sounds great. Love Juliette Lewis.
Well, I guess that's enough murder for this week. But if you could use just a bit more murder, you can get your fill on MurderMurder.news, where we post the latest breaking true crime news every day of the week.
You can also find us on Instagram at MurderMurder.news, on Twitter at MurderNews, on TikTok at MurderMurder.news, and on Facebook, find our page by searching for MurderMurder.news.
While you're on Facebook, searching for Murder Murder News, you'll also see our group pop up, and you'll want to make sure you're a member if you need somewhere to post those gruesome articles and spooky memes where folks will actually appreciate them. And if you want in on our virtual book club. We're meeting on Zoom this Sunday to discuss September's selection, Don't Call It a Cult by Sarah Berman. We hope to see you all there. And we want to give you a heads up to keep an eye on our Facebook group in the next little while so you don't miss our poll, and you can cast your vote for our next few selections, which we'll read in October, November, and December.
make your random act of kindness by leaving us a rating or 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And make sure you subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you never miss an episode.
Have a great week.
Bye, spooky friends.
Bye.